Hello everyone and welcome to another BIM Zero event. Today's topic is model checking and how to avoid errors. I'm the host, Daniel Monteiro, and this event is brought to you by BIMfreelance and sponsored by BIM Week and BIM Campus. Today's host is named Andrew Lopez. He is a technologist, architect, expert in digital transformation. He's a BIM manager and information manager. He's also the director of the multinational Graphisoft for ES Latam. He's currently linked as a consultant to Solibri, a referent of BIM in Spain and internationally, and is a member of the organizing committee of ES BIM, the Spanish adoption strategy, and lastly, professor and diffuser in numerous lectures and masters. Hello, Andrew, and welcome.
Hi, how you doing, guys?
Thank you for being here with us.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll go straight ahead for the questions. So, Andrew, to be honest, the AEC world has made and continues to make various mistakes every day, right?
Yep. The thing is that we have been promised that BIM would solve most of our problems in terms of being able to see all aspects of the building, be that in 3D or 2D and so forth, because supposedly one generates the other. But at the end of each of these processes, you still have a human being, and therefore your capacity to push the wrong button is very high. So yes, we still continue to do mistakes, and tends to be human error plus lack of real collaboration in achieving a clash-free model.
Okay, and what is model check in regards to this?
Right, I mean, if you're checking a model or models, it depends on how far you want to go. The basics is usually to do with interference or collisions. But there's quite a bit more sophistication in anything that you do regarding validation rather than just checking. To validate something or to check something, it's usually to ensure that what's required for that building in itself, which is represented by our models in BIM, will actually perform according to the specifications we expect. The very basic minimum is making sure that nothing clashes with anything else. But then, for example, we need to be able to ensure that a program is being addressed. In other words, the brief of the project is being addressed correctly. For example, areas or surfaces that you want to make sure that they're compliant in terms of what is expected from the development point of view. Or if you're talking, for example, relationships between different spaces, if you want to make sure that, for example, a toilet is within a certain distance from a workplace, or if you're in a shopping center, that you have these disposed or positioned in strategic areas that people don't have to travel too much. You can even start thinking along the lines of accessibility, ensuring that your ramps, your stairs, and even your accessible toilets are up to code, and that many other issues that we can do. Eventually, once we get the truth, if you like, about the model itself being right, then we can start extracting information. Model mining is one of those information areas that we really need to address more seriously when we think of working in BIM, because there's lots of stuff that can actually come out of the models that we just don't get to do.
Okay. Now, where is it applied? In what place, in what environments? I mean, like BIM environments such as Revit, ArchiCAD, common data environments.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because normally you will have a model being served, if you like, or published to a common data environment. The common data environment, if you like, is the holding place where different actors can come into it. But there are different types of common data environments. There's some that are just purely dedicated to the communication, for example, of what happens in the model. And there are those who actually have not just the model, but also the plans that actually allow you to relate both plans and models, plus extraction of documentation or additional documents that you need to have addressing different parts of the building. So yes, it does cover quite a bit, because you're able to communicate things directly, dynamically, by synchronizing very quickly and addressing issues which will otherwise take a long, long time to go forth and come back with emails or with meetings of some sort. Imagine if you're able to see the same model from one point of view and everybody gets to see it at the same time, decision making is much easier. And if that is addressed in such a way that it relates to your plans, once they change, you're able to compare them or to have a look at how they've actually evolved, then you're killing two birds with one stone.
So this is about the communication with the project agents, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the sooner you get into that, the better. And I keep saying, they say, well, when do you start validating a model or a project? I said from the very beginning. The description of the brief, and as I was saying before, what's the relationship between spaces, which is the first thing we tend to do, needs to be checked. If the spaces are correctly rationalized in terms of net areas or perhaps even proportions, ensuring, for example, that we are within a building envelope that is allowable or not, or if we have any setbacks, well, that needs to be addressed at the beginning. If you do that properly, then the actual modeling of that building comes into place and is not going to have problems of not fitting on site, or perhaps not having the right surfaces, or perhaps not being able to address issues relating to accessibility, for example. So yes, we do communicate, but it's important to ensure that we do these things in order. And it means that there are several ways of defining models at different stages. So you don't have to start modeling something all the way down to the bolt before you start checking it. You need to have enough information to do what is supposed to be done at that particular stage. And that's the key to the question. And that's the way we're going to work less, but be more efficient.
Okay. So the model check and the validating of a model, they're linked together.
Interrelated, totally interrelated.
And you also talked about the process control.
Absolutely.
But can you talk a little bit about the data control?
Absolutely. Well, one of those things that we tend to have is that we get engaged by the 3D aspect or the geometry. We like the renders, but we forget information. It is terribly important to have a brief at the beginning that establishes through the employee's information requirements what is the data requirement for the owner or for the person that's going to be maintaining or running this particular building once it's finished or delivered. We have to be sure that we cover the basics, ensuring that first of all is what is required, that all the information is filled correctly, that in fact it is the allowable if you like, information or values that are attached to these properties or data in order to be able to fulfill what is requested by the employer's information requirement. Information can be very diverse. You could have things directly to the physical aspect of it, or you can have things that are necessarily related to it, but are linked. For example, manufacturer's instructions, right? Or perhaps what is the actual number of the product, or what is the serial number, or what can you do, or what is your preventative maintenance that needs to be done. That information can actually live in the model, or it can be attached as a reference to those elements in the model.
Okay, and about the extraction of information, the extraction of data for third parties.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because everybody has a different idea of what they require when they extract information. Not two agents are going to be measuring for example, quantities alike. Some will measure one way, others will measure another. At the same time, if you want to communicate with third parties that not necessarily are involved in the BIM process, but need that information in order to make decisions or to track the project, then we need to be able to export this information in a standard document system or information delivery that is going to be apt to be absorbed, if you like, by the different kinds of processes or platforms that will actually be able to put that in place. So it's essential to understand what is it that we want to extract, what are the values that we're expecting, what are the properties that we need, and in what order. So if you do that, then you should be able to extract a very simple Excel that has headers that have been defined. And it means then that any system like a SAP or in a Vision or anything like that can actually absorb it and then continue with the flow of checking, or if you like, ensuring that the project is at the right stage with the right information.
Now, put the audience in context. When in the project life cycle is the model checked?
As I was saying before, from the very beginning. Why? Because if we don't do or make decisions at the beginning, the carry-on effect of not making the right decision at early stages will evolve as a snowball as we go beyond and we haven't checked it. So coming back or returning once we've made decisions, or actually once we haven't made those decisions, can be very costly. So you do it at design stage, you do it even at briefing stage, whereby you're going to be ensuring, as I was saying before, that surfaces or areas, relationships, limitations of those areas, connectivity among them, how they actually interact, external, if you like, limitations as to what we can do on a site, actual recognition of what the site really looks like and how does it affect us in terms of, if you like, accessibility. That needs to be done at a very early stage.
Okay, and later on in the operation phase, is it used there?
Oh, definitely. See, what happens then is that you have a total database that actually can be extracted or can be continued in any medium. In other words, if you have a CDE, for example, that incorporates models or incorporates plans and information, plus, if you like, equipment information that needs to be then set out for the maintenance of the project, or in that case, the actual building in itself, then that becomes a relational database that for a person that needs to maintain that is able to find it very quickly and then check against, for example, internal listings of how or when things get acted on. Normally speaking, FM systems will be list-based, and the problem is that we do not necessarily know where these things that need to be maintained live. For example, in a shopping center, if you need to go to an AHU, an air handling unit system, or a plant room, and you have to change something, you don't know where it is exactly located by a list. You don't know if you need a ladder. You don't know where's your nearest place where you can pick up the exchange pieces. And you don't know how much crew or how many people are related to that zone. So if you were to save in traveling time, in strategic places to collect information or collect elements that you need to replace, and know that your axis is correct, you save a lot of time in that worksheet. And that means that it's a huge saving as you go along the life cycle of the project. So it is essential that we have the data correct, and it means that it needs to be interrelated. As I was saying, we have the 3D as against where it is located on the project, as against what kind of data we need and what conditions are required.
Excellent. So we need that throughout all the life cycle.
Yeah.
Now, all of this data, who organizes it? You know, do you need do you need someone with special abilities to organize all of this?
Right. Now, this is a bit of a situation where there are many views about it, but normally speaking, you would probably have the project coordinator, if you like, that would actually be ensembling how things get put in place and what are the workflows in order to achieve this. Then you would have to have others that may be in place, like the BIM manager. The BIM manager in this case might be overlooking external and internal processes and see how we relate to, for example, third parties. But essentially, the BIM coordinator should be, in fact, a person that actually understands the employer's information requirements, that is actually being able to, with the help of the BIM manager, create that BIM execution plan, and then assemble a workflow that is going to incorporate both internal, intermediate stages and information from this project, if you like, and I like to call it a federated project because it has several models as against third parties.
Okay, but beyond the skills of the BIM coordinator, which are, you know, large, do you think there's a need for a more specialized, let's say, use a more specialized profile for this, such as an information manager?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes hand in hand. Sometimes we wear different hats, but we're the same person. We are actually acting in different roles. It depends on the size of the project. Okay. So a BIM manager might become the coordinator and might even be the information manager in different stages of the project. Okay. Depending on the size, as I say, and the organization that you currently have. The information manager has to be able to understand, I guess, how that information is going to be used, what's the flow, who is getting that information, for what reasons. And that is complementary to the relationship I was explaining before, from the BIM manager to the BIM coordinator, in terms of establishing what the workflows are, what are the requirements, and how do we actually comply with what is expected. So one is originally the startup of a process. The second is the one that makes sure that the process as it goes on a cyclic basis is correctly addressed. And then after that, you'll find the final one, which is the information manager, that ensures that the information is correct in the right structure and is correctly sent out or shared among those that need it.
Okay. And regarding model checking and the rules for model checking, is the person who creates the same as the person who manages it?
Well, it depends again on the size of the project. Okay, so again, there's another hat, which is a validation manager, right? Now, in some cases, these can be, if you like, subcontracted to a third party that actually will follow through the validation setup. And this is done cyclically and is in conjunction, very closely related to the BIM coordinator. And sometimes it'll be also necessary for the validation manager to create, if you like, an environment of extraction of information that suits the information manager.
Okay. Now, we have talked briefly about this, but I want to link this topic with the previous BIM Zero events, in which we talked about the necessity of avoiding mistakes early. So could you tell us, what are the exact benefits of avoiding these mistakes early?
Okay, I mean, there are so many studies being done, and there's a certain study according to Roy's, right, what's your return on investment. But do understand that a decision that you haven't made correctly at the right time can have an accelerator if that is not detected until such a time where it's going to start costing a lot of money. And sometimes it's not just money, but it's the involvement of the different parties that have to do something in order to mediate or remediate the situation. And again, it's not just money, it's time, and it's people's resources. So the ripple effect can be quite substantial if we don't check things from the very beginning. It is said that if something is not checked and it goes to the stage of construction, you're adding something like 80% to the cost of having checked that or picked it up at an early stage. That's a heck of a lot of multiplier if you think about it, if you don't pick it up. It is not all black and white. Sometimes you'll find there's a lot of meandering. People will make mistakes, come back and do, and it's become part of the culture. So there's also lack of transparency, and therefore many people don't want to disclose their mistakes. We're all human beings after all, and we hate to be pointed at if we do something wrong. That's why BIM is such a great thing if it's kept transparent, because it means that everybody put their cards on the table, act as a team to get things resolved, and take away the human aspect of trying to hide or pushing things under the carpet just in case something goes wrong. So it is, again, a cultural shift that has to happen. It's beginning to occur, but not in all areas.
Okay. And would you say there are different types of errors? And if so, which are those?
Okay. Errors can be sometimes false errors. That's one first thing. And let me describe why. If you start thinking of a hard clash, that is something that penetrates something, all right? That is an error. That is a problem. That's a basic one. But sometimes something just touches that for a purpose and still detected as an error, but it is not. That's why it is important to be able to have rules that allow you to discern and also to have tolerances and exceptions for the actual different areas of coordination, physical coordination, okay? But then there's another thing that you need to do as well. There's another type of error. Lack of information is one, the wrong information is another. And thirdly, when you have the information that somebody's put in that is not actually required. So part of the validation process is to ensure that, first of all, the right information is in place according to the requirements, again, by the client, that these informations will flow according to the different elements that we have. So typically speaking, if you're talking about a Revit environment, you will have to have a shared parameters file that is going to tell you what elements or what families have what properties, and therefore you'll be able to actually start filling them in. Now we tend to forget, okay, that information needs to flow back into the model, because otherwise we're not continuing or being able to extract it. So essentially speaking, if you're doing OpenBIM, the IFC is going to be the picture, if you like, or the holding back of that information at a particular moment. And that means that if we haven't fed the model back with relevant information, that is, values for those properties that haven't been filled in, especially when we are on site, there's no way in heavens that we can extract that information for further use later on in the project. So that is also a mistake. There's another error that is usually a big problem, and that is lack of decision being made on something that we find. Believe it or not, when you find something wrong, it has several, if you like, ripple effects. And if they're not looked beyond, then we're just answering one question and creating other issues, right? So that's why it's so essential to have a participation of the people that are all actors that are involved in that particular problem. And what is the ramification of that, again, as a team in collaboration? Because otherwise you will have a problem, because you might solve something now and you haven't seen something further on. And unless you get the collaboration of others that have seen that and come back to you, you have no teamwork.
That is very important, that collaboration aspect. Now, you know, everyone in regards to that, every user can check if the model is okay, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So not necessarily a manager is checking the model, but the whole team can do it.
Right. That is called individual accountability. In other words, just because somebody says something and you don't want to talk about it because it's not your business, it should be right. Right. So the idea of being able to communicate this information through a system in the cloud, like it could be BIMtrack or BIMcollab or anything like that, is essential. So every team player, be that at a first tier, second tier, third tier, even fourth tier, should be able to come back and collaborate by either commenting on something that they've seen and it's coming to them and it's going to affect them, or something that they've seen that someone has done that could affect other people. So again, I stress the collaboration aspect of this and the communication. It needs to be controlled. So therefore, when we have a major review, well, that's with the main people, but it doesn't mean that that major review shouldn't have smaller reviews in local areas. So for example, the subcontractor or the discipline, the subdiscipline like mechanical or anything like that, can actually have their own review process internally and have the head of that particular group be the person or agent that communicates for major reviews of the project.
Okay, okay, very interesting. Now, taking a step back, you know, about the assets. How do you certify an asset? You know, how to homologate it or give it a seal?
Right. Okay. That is a very good question, and it's usually not a simple answer. Okay. There is no such standard at this stage. No one can certificate anything like that because information is at a particular moment. Right. You can have that most of the project is correct. There's always going to be tolerances of lack of definition. Eventually, you will get those as well. But usually, that is at the period where you have the liability period or you have the warranty period, okay, of any defects period that you may have, maybe 3 to 6 months. And that's where you iron out the rest of it. So what I think can be done is that according to the requirements from the client and having reports that can say that this information is available and it's inside correctly organized and without duplications or anything that's missing, then that can be in itself a certification. But it's always based not on the person, but on the information. In other words, we're fulfilling information requirements.
Okay, okay. Now, what impact do you think these error detections are having in the investment world?
Oh, quite a big one. Just think of insurance. So there are many insurance companies now that are going to give you a plus or reduce your liability if you have a validation system in place. It's like obeying to the ISO standards. If you do your checks and crosses and you get it right, that means that you're doing the right process, and therefore you should be appreciated for that. Okay, so insurance is one of those that are very much required by investors. The investors will look upon favorably if somebody has a validation process in place, and that definitely has an affectation on how you are selected for a project when you're bidding, for example. So that is going to be a major issue in the future, because we're in a litigation world, and unfortunately it's very hard to get away from that. The simplest way to do it is to put measures that are going to ameliorate the situation, because you can never say that you're not going to have anything. Obviously, you will have problems, but maybe because you see them coming way ahead, you have measures, a means to rectify that within a reasonable given time, and therefore your affectation is going to be way reduced.
Okay, and what do you think? What do you estimate? What impact do you estimate it as today on the financial world? I mean, a mortgage on an asset created by this system and one that hasn't. What is the difference?
Well, again, it depends on what the final outcome is in terms of the asset. Let me give you an example. If you're talking about a shopping center, the more time that shopping center is being built, the less money it's making, because it is not necessary to do with what happens on site, because that's a relatively small amount of investment compared to the investment over a lifetime. But just think of a hospital. Hospital is exactly the same thing. So if you do not have a system whereby you're going to validate and check and ensure that you have the right processes and information requirements, then the actual liability is very, very high. How much? I have no idea. It's how long is a piece of string? It depends on how much you're actually being affected. And if anybody decides to quantify that as against some projects that have not been following this process, that would be a new one. That would be interesting to check. But again, people tend to keep these things very close to heart because it is a competitive advantage.
Okay, sure. And why do you think these sectors are not asking for the endorsement of BIM technology to avoid problems?
Well, you got two issues. One, transparency. You know that most contractors will always keep a contingency situation just in case they get caught. At the same time, there's the variation of different projects, because sometimes it will bid low and then you will find all kinds of errors, and therefore you will make money on that project, even if you bid low initially. So trying to go against that culture is difficult. Okay, as I was saying before, people are extremely conscious of not being pointed at because of errors, and is not seen as a collaborative approach. We still have enemies, and the engineers' enemies are the architects, and both the engineers and the architects' enemies could be the contractor. And on top of that, you've got the owner, who's going to be very upset if you don't have any kind of collaboration or actually get results that are within what his investment is expecting. So yeah, it is an issue, and it's a cultural issue at that.
Very well. So in various topics regarding BIM and even BIM itself, we usually talk about a certain unawareness throughout all the eco sector and even the public regarding it. So you mean to say that to at least some extent the issue here is not the unawareness of the benefits mobile checking could bring us, but that lack of transparency itself Is that the problem, or does an awareness have something to do with it?
Oh, look, awareness is important, and I think we're getting better. We all thought that BIM was a tool, and it's not. Okay, it's a workflow, it's a way of working, it's a little bit of a technology as well, but it's definitely not a single tool. Right now, that is beginning to change now. There's lots of more awareness right throughout. The younger people coming out of universities are far better addressed than we used to be. But again, it is the cultural aspect that still needs a lot of work on. Until you actually come to terms with that, it's going to be difficult. We find very good examples in the northern countries in Europe, for example, Finland or Sweden or even Norway, because they have understood that the gain is greater for everybody than the antagonistic approach that we currently have. But that requires a certain transition, and it requires a certain change in that culture, which we're all still going through. It is a very competitive world. And if we think we're losing grip or control of our own situation, then we become very irritated and we can be very aggressive.
So, the awareness is important to a change of culture, right?
Well, I think more than anything is the message that has to come through the different actors in the industry to actually drop down their guards and be more analytical about what we do. I'll give you an example. You imagine that you and I are holding hands on the side, we're just next to each other, and then we're supposed to be hitting each other's leg, right? Imagine from one side to the other. What would be better? Is it better for the stronger one to make sure that he hits himself more times than the other one? Or would it be better if both of them collaborated and hit each other much, much quicker and get better results? That's a very simple rule, very simple example, but that's what we have to overcome. We have to overcome the obvious in front of us, and we have to look at what comes and out of what we should do if we were to collaborate.
Okay, that's great. That's a great and important, very important message. And I think that about wraps it up. So,
no problem.
Andrew, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for sharing your extent knowledge on this topic. It's
sure.
It's so important for us to speak with the experts like you, and thank you for being here.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure.
And thank you to the audience. And we keep in mind that there are always more events on our part. So continue checking the social media, continue checking the site for more events such as this. Thank you everyone who has watched, and thank you, Andrew, again.
My pleasure.
Bye.
See you later.